Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to Watchbox, and thanks for logging on. If you love this watch, email me, tmosso at thewatchbox.com. It's in the description below. Your purchase and pricing email question line for buying this or any watch you see here on our channel, on our website, or our social media. Reach out to me directly, tmosso at thewatchbox.com. Today we are discussing the latest generation Audemars Piguet Royal Oak Jumbo. 39 millimeters in stainless steel. This is the latest iteration of the 15202ST. The timepiece is truly extra thin. 8.1 millimeters thick as I measure it. It slides underneath any cuff. It does wear larger than its rated size, as all Royal Oaks do. So from lug to lug, this one measures 48.6 millimeters. And if we include these little intermediate plots, the full distance across the wrist is a fairly beefy 51.6 millimeters. So though it's a 39, consider it more like a 41 for fit purposes. On my 16 centimeter circumference wrist, you can see it wears like a Royal Oak, which is to say broad and flat. The timepiece does sit very low on the wrist, and here's your cuff shot. It's going to fit underneath any sleeve. Now overhead, you can see how broad it is. It doesn't want to pull all the way around the wrist. So if you wanted to pull that bracelet down completely, it wouldn't pull vertically, and I'll show you what I mean in a second. So there's your down the barrel shot. You can see I do have some clearance on either side, and there's your overhead shot. I would not recommend this watch for a wrist smaller than 14 centimeters circumference, and this is why. That's as far down as I can pull the bracelet. I can't pull it 90 degrees to the case band. Now taking a look at the bracelet, this is one of the highlights of a Royal Oak. It takes approximately 10 hours to finish these bracelets in steel, and that's before we count the bezel in the case. Now you can see that the character line that expands from the mid case and flares over the lug hoods continues polished all the way along the individual shoulders of each link, and they're perfectly aligned. You could see that the bracelet itself tapers down, and I can't feel the individual steps. That's how tight the tolerances are. You can also see polish where you wouldn't expect it. As you can see, the intermediate links have polished faces. That's something you wouldn't see until you start to roll through the bracelet. So there's hand finish here where you can't even see it under normal circumstances. There's vertical satin finish on the top and longitudinal satin finish across the bracelet primary links. You can also see that the bracelet is held on by screws and bars. No spring bars here, AP doing things the right way. Screws and bars for absolute security. You can also see that the clasps on these jumbos have grown more robust over the years. Internally, they're media blasted and they're satin finished. The swing arms are thick and so is the chassis. They have twin trigger release, so once closed, they stay shut resolutely. And the whole clasp assembly feels tough enough to be fit to an offshore. Rolling back to the case, you can see that classically designed, it is the 1972 Gerald Genta shape that we first saw in the 5402 Royal Oak. There have been some changes, and we'll talk about that in a moment, but the basic shape and look have stayed the same. Satin finish along the flank. The character line continues from the octagonal bezel through the case back in the mid case, and you can see that there's satin on the top, satin on the side, the expanding polished bevel along the edge, a hexagonal push-down crown that's matched to the hexagonal form of the white gold recessed bolts inside the rounded octagon bezel, which is inspired by a diving helmet, a vintage diving helmet to be sure. So you have the rounded octagon outboard with its polished and rounded edges, and then vertical satin finish on the top. The dial here is the blue variant, which is considered the rarest and the most desirable. It's generally only sold through AP boutiques, though some premier dealers will occasionally get them. The hands are white gold, and you can see that the timepiece features a monotone date disc, which incredibly it did not have before 2012, but it's blue now to match the dial. This is the Petite Tapisserie, the smallest of the hobnail patterns and the most traditional that you'll find on a Royal Oak or offshore. It's cut on a 19th century pantograph mimicry lathe that starts with a big template and then etches all of the textures and forms of the template onto this tiny brass dial blank. So it is old school production on a 19th century lathe, and since 2012 this is done in-house at AP. The movement here is known as the 2121, and it has its roots in a 1967 ultra-thin automatic caliber called the JLC 920 that was built by JLC for Patek, Vacheron, and AP. JLC never used the movement, but Vacheron, AP, and Patek used it extensively. You'll also find it inside, for example, the Vacheron 222 and the Patek Philippe Nautilus 3700 in its initial variants. It's a unit directional winder with a 40-hour power reserve. It beats away at 19,800 vibrations per per hour, pivots on 36 joules. It has a quasi-quick set, whereby you back the hour hand from 10 p.m. through midnight, and you will quick change the date thusly, but it doesn't have a conventional rotating crown quick set. It does not feature hacking seconds, but in return for that, you get ultra-thin construction, as the basic movement is only about 2.4 millimeters thick. It has a free-sprung gyromax style balance, which allows it to be very precisely regulated and then take and hold that regulation in the face of bumps and concussions on the wrist. This is all 50 meters water resistant. One of the more interesting features of this movement is that there is an annular rotor system. So there's a full beryllium ring that runs all the way around, and then half of it bears the red gold mass. Now there are 4 ruby rollers underneath that allow this ring to be sunken into the same plane as the bridges, allowing the watch to have a very thin profile without risk of the rotor banging into the base plate or the bridges. So that's how that's pulled off. You can also see that the finish, from the anglage to the blackening of the screws, the engine turning of the base plate, and the Côte de Genève, is executed to a much higher standard than a conventional 15400 or 15500, so you are getting what you pay for with these latest generation Royal Oaks. They stick to the traditional standards for finishing of the case, for construction of the dial, for finishing of the movement. The one major change I've found is that since approximately the J serial numbers are roughly 2016 to 2017, it's no longer a monoblock case. As you can see, the reverse side of the watch is a discrete component held on separately. So these are now tripartite cases with the bezel, the mid case, and the case back. But that's really one of the only changes that's made since the 2000 debut of the 15202. It has been a matter of refinement and still the most desirable of the Royal Oaks. Email tmosso@thewatchbox.com for purchase and pricing details.